There are nights that don't just change your life. There are nights that erase it. Not slowly, not with warning, but all at once, like someone reached into your chest, grabbed everything that ever made you, and simply walked away with it. This is not a story about what was taken. This is a story about what was rebuilt. Her name was Zara Mitchell, and before the world broke her open, she was the kind of person who made strangers smile without even trying.
Hi, I'm Ray. Welcome to my channel, Tales of the Heart by Ray. I am glad to have you as part of my community. Please comment where you are watching from. I would like to know. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more beautiful and interesting stories.
People in the Westview neighborhood of Atlanta, Georgia, didn't use many words to describe Zara Mitchell. They didn't need to. They just said, "You know Zara," and whoever was listening would nod, slow and warm, like the name itself carried sunshine in it. She was 17 years old, 5'6", with deep brown eyes that held the kind of focus you only see in people who have already decided who they're going to become. She wore her natural hair in twists most days, carried a worn copy of Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson in her backpack, and had a habit of underlining sentences that moved her with a red pen, then reading them aloud to herself at night like prayers. Her father, Raymond Mitchell, was a high school history teacher who believed, truly, deeply believed, that knowledge was the most dangerous weapon a black child in America could carry. Not dangerous to others, dangerous to the systems that wanted to keep them small. He used to sit across from Zara at the kitchen table after dinner, tap his finger on whatever book she was reading, and say, "You understand this, baby girl, and there's nothing they can build high enough to keep you out." She believed him. She believed everything her father said. Her mother, Diane Mitchell, was a registered nurse who worked long shifts at Grady Memorial Hospital and still somehow found energy to braid Zara's hair every Sunday morning, humming old gospel songs under her breath. Diane had a laugh that started in her stomach and filled whatever room she was in, and she used that laugh generously, like it cost her nothing. Like joy was something she had in unlimited supply and planned to share it all before she left this earth. Together, Raymond and Diane Mitchell had built something rare in this world, a home where a child felt safe, and Zara, brilliant, focused, quietly determined Zara, had big plans for that safety as her foundation. She had already been accepted into a pre-law summer program at Spelman College. She had a folder on her laptop titled Law School Plan, with color-coded timelines and a list of mentors she wanted to contact. She wanted to become a civil rights attorney, not because it was glamorous, but because she had grown up watching people in her community get chewed up by a legal system that was never designed to protect them. And she wanted to be the person standing between those people and that machine. She told her father this once, and Raymond Mitchell had gone very quiet for a moment. Then he looked at her with eyes full of something that wasn't quite pride. It was more than pride. It was recognition, like he was looking at someone the world had been waiting for. "They're not ready for you, Zara," he said. She laughed. He laughed. And Diane came in from the kitchen asking what was so funny, and they laughed even harder. That was the last truly peaceful night the Mitchell family ever had. It had been Zara's idea to go out that Friday evening. There was a small poetry showcase at a community art center downtown, the kind of event her mother would have skipped for a bath and a book. But Zara had begged just enough to make Diane put on her good earrings. Raymond drove, as he always did, one hand loose on the wheel, the other tapping the dashboard to whatever old-school R&B was playing on the radio. They were a family who filled car rides with noise. Beautiful noise, arguments about music, debates about history, Diane correcting Raymond's facts while he insisted he was a teacher and should be trusted. Zaz sat in the back seat and watched them and felt, in that ordinary moment, something she couldn't quite name. A fullness, a completeness. She didn't know she was memorizing them. She didn't know she needed to. The showcase ran long. By the time they stepped back into the night air, the sky had turned a deep, bruised gray and rain had started falling. Not gently, but with intention, like the clouds had made a decision and weren't taking it back. Raymond pulled his jacket over Diane's head as they rushed to the car, and Diane shrieked and laughed, and Zara ran ahead and held the door open like a tiny, dramatic butler. "Y'all are embarrassing," she said, grinning wide. "You love us," Raymond said. "Unfortunately," she replied, and they drove home through the rain. The roads were slick in the way Atlanta roads get after a dry spring, the oil rising to the surface with the first heavy rain, turning every lane into something treacherous, disguised as ordinary. Raymond slowed down. He was careful. He was always careful. But being careful doesn't stop what's already moving towards you. A delivery truck, speeding overcorrecting on the wet road, crossed the center line at a blind curve on Cascade Avenue at exactly 10:47 p.m. There was a horn. Just one long, desperate blast of sound. Then there were headlights, massive, blinding, filling the entire windshield like a second sun. And then there was nothing. No sound. No pain. No time to scream or pray or say I love you one final time. Just nothing. Zara woke up in a hospital bed at Grady Memorial Hospital, her mother's hospital, 3 days later. The room was white and quiet and smelled like antiseptic and something floral that was probably meant to be comforting but wasn't. A machine beeped beside her. Her left arm was in a brace. Her head felt like it had been filled with wet concrete. A nurse was adjusting something on her IV when she opened her eyes. And the woman looked up and immediately softened her expression into that particular shape that faces make when they're preparing to deliver something unbearable. Zara already knew. She knew the way you know things in your body before your mind catches up. She knew by the weight of the silence in that room. She knew by the absence of her father's voice. Because Raymond Mitchell had never once in her 17 years of life been somewhere she needed him and not been there. She knew by the way the nurse pressed the call button and stepped back, giving her space the way people give you sway and they know you're about to fall. A doctor came in, then a social worker, then a woman Zara recognized distantly, a great aunt maybe, someone from the family's edges. They spoke, their mouths moved, words came out. But Zara heard only one thing, wrapped around all the other words like a cold wire. They didn't make it. The room tilted. The beeping machine suddenly felt very loud. Zara looked at the ceiling, white, plain, offering nothing, and she made a sound that didn't sound like anything that had ever come out of her before. Not crying, not screaming. Something beneath both of those. Something animal and ancient and completely alone. Raymond Mitchell, Diane Mitchell, gone. In a single moment on a rainy Friday night on Cascade Avenue. Gone. And 17-year-old Zara, the girl with the red pen and the law school folder and the father who believed in her and the mother who laughed like joy, was free, was suddenly, catastrophically, terrifying. Alone. They say grief comes in stages. That there's a process. That time heals. But what they don't tell you is what happens in the hours between the hospital and the healing. What happens when you're 17 years old, parentless and bewildered, and the world keeps moving at its regular speed, as if it did not just destroy everything that made your life make sense. What happens when the person who is supposed to take you home is not someone who wants you there? Zara Mitchell was about to find out. And nothing could have prepared her for what came next. The funeral of Raymond and Diane Mitchell was held on a Tuesday morning at New Hope Baptist Church on Martin Luther King Jr. Drive, the same church where Raymond had taught Sunday school for 11 years. The same church where Diane had sung in the choir every third Sunday with a voice that made older women close their eyes and sway without realizing it. The pews were full. That's the first thing Zara noticed when she walked in, still moving carefully because her ribs were wrapped and her left arm was in a soft cast, and every breath hurt in ways that had nothing to do with the physical injury. The pews were completely, overwhelmingly full. Teachers from Raymond's school, nurses from Diane's ward, neighbors, former students, community members who had simply known the Mitchells the way you know people who make a neighborhood feel like a neighborhood. By their presence, their generosity, their refusal to keep their goodness private. Zara sat in the front row and stared at two caskets draped in white and tried to make her mind accept something it kept refusing. She could not cry during the service. Not because she didn't feel anything. She felt everything, all at once, in a way that had no shape or name, but because the feeling was so enormous that it had gone past tears into something like numbness. a protective shutdown, her body's quiet act of mercy. People hugged her, said her name, said her parents' names, said things like, "They're with the Lord now, and your mama was an angel, and your daddy was one of the good ones." She nodded at all of it. She held herself very still. And in the third pew from the front, slightly to the left, sat a woman Zara had met perhaps 4 times in her entire life. Gloria Reeves, her mother's older sister. She was dressed in all black, which was appropriate, with gold jewelry at her ears and wrists, which was perhaps slightly less appropriate for a funeral, but very appropriate for a woman who always wanted to be noticed. She had Diane's bone structure, but none of Diane's warmth. Where Diane's face has always been open, Gloria's was composed, calculated, the kind of face that was always doing math behind the eyes. After the service, as people milled around the reception hall with paper plates of food and quiet conversation, Gloria Reeves approached Zara with both arms extended. "Baby," she said, pulling her into a hug that lasted exactly as long as a hug performed for an audience lasts. "You're coming home with me. I already spoke to the county. It's all arranged." Zara looked at her. She wanted to ask, arranged by who? Since when? Did anyone ask me? But she was 17 and exhausted, and there was nowhere else to go, so she said nothing. And that silence, that one exhausted silence, was the first door she walked through into the worst chapter of her young life. Gloria lived in a house in East Point that looked perfectly fine from the outside. Brick front, neat lawn. A welcome mat at the door that said "Blessed" in cheerful yellow letters. Zara would later think about that welcome mat often, about the particular cruelty of that word sitting there at the entrance of that house. Inside, the home was comfortable. Not luxurious, but comfortable. A wide living room with a large television. A kitchen that smelled of grease and something sweet. 3 bedrooms down a narrow hallway. Gloria had 2 children of her own. Deshaun, 15, who barely looked up from his phone when Zara walked in. And Keisha, 13, who stared at Zara with open curiosity and then looked at her mother as if waiting to be told how to feel about this new arrival. Gloria showed Zara to a small room at the back of the house, more of a utility room that had been loosely converted, with a cot, a single bare bulb overhead, and a window that faced a wooden fence. "You can put your things there," Gloria said, gesturing to a small shelf. Zara looked at the shelf, looked at the cot, looked at the bare bulb. "Thank you," she said, because she had been raised with manners, and manners are sometimes the only thing that survive a catastrophe intact. Gloria nodded briskly. "Dinner's at 7. I need help with the dishes after." And she left. Zara stood alone in that small room, her one bag of belongings at her feet. The hospital had given her a plastic bag of the things recovered from the crash site, a few clothes someone from the church had brought, and her backpack miraculously intact, with her worn copy of Just Mercy still inside, and she breathed slowly. "This is temporary," she told herself. "This is just temporary." She had no idea how wrong she was. It took less than a week for the architecture of Gloria Reeves's household to reveal itself completely. There were no dramatic announcements, no sit-down conversations with clearly stated expectations. It happened the way all insidious things happen, gradually, through accumulation, through small moments that each seemed almost reasonable on their own, but together formed something monstrous. By the 3rd morning, Zara understood that she was expected to be awake by 5:30 to start breakfast, before Gloria left for her job at the county clerk's office. By the 5th day, she understood that the dishes after dinner were always hers, as were the floors, the laundry, the grocery runs, when Gloria gave her a list and exact change, and expected both to return correctly accounted for. By the end of the 1st week, she understood that Deshaun and Keisha were not expected to contribute to any of this, that they woke at comfortable hours, ate the breakfast Zara had made, dropped their plates in the sink without rinsing them, and moved through the house with the easy authority of people who had never been asked to be anything other than children. Zara was not a child in this house. She was something else, something without a clean name that she wasn't yet ready to assign words to. She asked, carefully, respectfully, about returning to school. She had missed nearly 2 weeks already, and she was acutely aware of it. She had spoken to her guidance counselor from the hospital, who had assured her that her academic standing was protected under bereavement policy. but she needed to return soon to maintain her Spelman program eligibility. Gloria looked up from her phone with an expression of vague irritation. "School," she repeated, as if the word were slightly absurd. "Yes, ma'am. I was in advanced placement and I have a summer program, that Zara." Gloria set her phone down. "Your parents are gone. That program money is gone. You need to be realistic about your situation. I could get financial aid. My grades are." "You need to be here," Gloria said, her voice dropping into something firm and final. "Keisha needs picking up at 3. Deshaun needs supervision after school. I need this household to run while I'm working. You want a roof over your head, you contribute." Zara stared at her. She thought of her father's voice. Knowledge is the most dangerous weapon a black child in America can carry. She thought of her worn copy of Just Mercy sitting on that small shelf in the utility room. She thought of the law school folder on her laptop, which Gloria had already mentioned casually that Zara could sell if she needed spending money. She pressed her lips together. "Yes, ma'am," she said, and she went to pick up Keisha at 3 o'clock. October became November. November swallowed December whole. Zara fell into a rhythm that had nothing to do with living and everything to do with surviving. She woke before the sun. She cooked, she cleaned, she ran errands, she babysat. She took small paid jobs around the neighborhood, helping an elderly woman named Miss Patterson with her garden, watching a neighbor's toddler on weekends, doing laundry runs for the family 2 doors down. And she handed every dollar she earned to Gloria, who accepted it without thanks, as though it were simply owed. She was not enrolled in school. She was not in the Spelman program. Her law school folder sat unopened on a laptop that was slowly running out of charge because she was too tired most nights to care. Some evenings, after the dishes were done and the floors were swept and Gloria's household was quiet, Zara would sit on the small cot in her utility room and open Just Mercy to a random page. She didn't always read. Sometimes she just held it, like a compass, like evidence that the world she believed in, the world her father had described to her at kitchen tables, the world where knowledge and justice and determination could mean something, still existed somewhere outside the walls of this house. Some nights she whispered things into the dark. "I'm still here, Daddy. I haven't given up, Mama. I'm still going to make it." And some nights, the harder nights, she wasn't sure she believed it, but she kept whispering it anyway, because that's what Raymond and Diane Mitchell had built into their daughter, deep in the foundation of her, where it couldn't be reached or removed or handed over with exact change and a grocery list. The will to keep going, even when everything said stop. It was a Tuesday in January when Gloria called Zara into the living room in a tone that was different from her usual tones. Not irritated, not brisk, but something careful, arranged, like a table set for guests. Zara came in wiping her hands on a dish towel, expecting another task, another instruction, another demand wrapped in the language of gratitude she was supposed to feel for having a roof over her head. What she found instead stopped her completely. There was a man sitting on Gloria's couch. He was large, not just tall but large in the way that fills a space and changes the air in it. Dark-skinned, heavy-jowled, dressed in expensive clothes that sat on him like a costume. He had a ring on nearly every finger and the particular stillness of a man who has never had to rush for anything because the world has always adjusted its speed to his. His eyes moved to Zara the moment she walked in, and something in those eyes made every hair on her arm stand straight. Gloria smiled, that smile that never reached her eyes. "Zara, this is Mr. Damon Wills. He's a business associate of mine." Damon Wills looked at Zara the way a person looks at something they've already decided to purchase. "She's exactly what you described," he said to Gloria, not to Zara, as though Zara were not standing right there, as though she were a photograph being confirmed rather than a person being addressed. Zara looked between them slowly. "What is this?" she asked. Gloria's smile didn't waver. "Mr. Wills has expressed an interest in a formal arrangement, a marriage. He's willing to be very generous." The dish towel dropped from Zara's hands. The room went very quiet. "A what?" Zara said. $150,000, Gloria said, with the lightness of someone announcing a sale at the grocery store. "He's offering $150,000, and you'll be taken care of. You'll have a home. Isn't that what you want?" Zara looked at Damon Wills. He looked back at her, and she understood, with the cold, total clarity of someone who has just seen the floor drop away beneath them, that this was not a conversation. This was a transaction. She was the item being sold. Later, people would ask Zara what she felt in that moment. She would think about it carefully before answering. She didn't feel fear first. She didn't feel anger first. She felt something quieter than both of those. She felt the specific, devastating grief of realizing that the last person in the world who was supposed to protect her had just put a price on her head. And then the fear came, and then the anger, and then something else. Something her father had put in her, something that could not be bought or sold or silenced. A decision. I will not stay. I will not let this be my story. But running from Damon Wills and Gloria Reeves was not going to be simple. Because some doors, once they close behind you, take everything you have left just to break them open. Zara stood completely still for exactly 4 seconds after Gloria announced the arrangement. 4 seconds of absolute stillness. The kind that comes not from calm, but from a mind processing something so far outside the boundaries of acceptable reality that it requires a moment just to confirm it is in fact real. Then she looked at Gloria Reeves, her mother's sister, her blood, the woman who had stood at her parents' funeral with arms extended and the word baby on her lips. And she said very quietly, "No." Gloria's expression shifted, just slightly. The pleasant arrangement of her face tightened at the edges. "Zara, no," Zara said again, still quiet, still controlled. But something underneath the quiet was beginning to vibrate. "I am not marrying anyone. I am 17 years old." Damon Wills uncrossed his legs slowly. He didn't raise his voice. Men like Damon Wills rarely raised their voices. They had learned long ago that quiet menace travels further than volume. "You'll be 18 in 4 months," he said, as though this were a perfectly reasonable contribution to the conversation. "We can wait." "You will wait forever," Zara said, "because my answer is no. It will always be no." Gloria stood up then, and whatever performance of warmth she had been maintaining for the past months dropped completely from her face. What was underneath was something Zara recognized. She had been seeing glimpses of it for months in small moments, but seeing it fully, without the mask, was something else entirely. It was contempt. Simple, clean, total contempt. "You don't have a choice," Gloria said. "You have no money, no parents, no school, no plan. You are living in my house, eating my food, and you will do what I say, or you will have nothing. You understand me? Nothing." Zara looked at her for a long moment. She thought of her mother's laugh. The one that started in her stomach, the one that filled every room it entered. She thought of her father's hand, tapping the cover of a book and saying, "There's nothing they can build high enough to keep you out." She thought of the worn copy of Just Mercy on the shelf in the utility room. "I understand you," Zara said. And she turned and walked calmly back to the utility room and closed the door. She moved quickly, but not frantically, with the focused precision of someone who has already made their decision and is now simply executing it. She took her backpack from the shelf, opened it, looked at what was inside. Just Mercy, her mother's small gold cross on a thin chain which she had been given at the hospital, her student ID from her old school, a notebook with her law school plan still outlined in color-coded ink, a charger, her phone, cracked screen, 43% battery. She packed the charger, the cross, the ID, the notebook. She left the book. Not because it didn't matter. It mattered more than almost anything she owned. But it was heavy, and she needed to be fast, and she thought, she believed, that everything her father had ever read to her from books like that was already inside her, already written into who she was. She didn't need to carry it. She was it. She put on 2 layers of clothes because January in Atlanta at night was cold, and she didn't know how long she'd be outside. She laced her shoes tight. She sat on the edge of the cot for exactly 30 seconds, breathing slowly, thinking clearly. Where do you go? She had $47 in cash, money she had hidden from Gloria Ma in the lining of the backpack over the course of 3 months, saving single dollars the way people save oxygen when there isn't enough. $47 and a cracked phone and a name that meant nothing to anyone in the world who could currently help her. She thought of Miss Patterson, the elderly woman whose garden she tended. Miss Patterson had always been kind, had always pressed an extra $1 or $2 into Zara's hand and said, "Keep something for yourself, baby, I won't tell." Miss Patterson lived 6 blocks away. It was a starting point. It was enough. Zara pulled the backpack onto her shoulders, stood up straight, and looked at the room one final time. The bare bulb, the cot, the wooden fence through the window. "Goodbye," she whispered to none of it, and she opened the door. The house was not silent. Gloria and Damon Wills were still in the living room. She could hear their voices, low and businesslike, the conversation of 2 people dividing something between them. Deshawn's television was on behind his closed door, blue light flickering in the gap beneath it. Keisha's room was dark and quiet. Zara moved down the hallway with the careful, weightless steps of someone who has spent months learning exactly which floorboards spoke and which ones stayed silent. Third board from the bathroom, skip it. The spot near the kitchen's entrance, hug the left wall. She had learned this house the way prisoners learn their cells, not with love, but with the exhaustive attention of someone always calculating the distance to the exit. She reached the back door, her hand closed around the handle. From the living room, Gloria's voice rose briefly. Something about paperwork, something about a timeline, then settled back down. Zara turned the handle. The cold January air hit her face like a reminder that the world outside was real, that there was an outside, that it was accessible and waiting in hers to move through. She stepped out, pulled the door closed behind her, soft, silent, final. She stood in the dark backyard for one breath, just one, and then she moved. The streets of East Point at midnight in January are not the streets of a city that welcomes wandering. They are wide and orange-lit and largely empty, with the occasional car passing and the distant sound of something, music, an argument, a dog, floating from somewhere unseen. The cold was serious cold, the kind that gets into the gap between your collar and your ear and stays there. Zara walked fast, then faster, then broke into a run without consciously deciding to. Running felt right. Running felt like the only honest response to everything that had happened in that house. She kept to the lit streets, avoided the stretches of darkness, moved with purpose even though her purpose was still largely away rather than toward. She was 6 blocks from Miss Patterson's house. She could get there in 10 minutes at this pace. She counted her breaths to keep herself steady. 1, 2, "Daddy, I'm running." 3, 4, "Mama, I'm running." 5, 6, "I'm okay. I'm going to be okay." She was 4 blocks from Miss Patterson's when she heard a car start somewhere behind her. She didn't look back. She didn't know if it was Gloria, if Damon Wills had been watching, if they had discovered her absence already. She didn't know, and so she ran faster, her sneakers loud on the wet pavement, her breath coming in visible clouds in the January air. 3 blocks. 2. She turned a corner onto a wider street. Campbellton Road, more traffic, more lights, safer, and she exhaled with relief and ran harder and thought, almost there, almost there, almost. She didn't see the car until it was already too late. It came from the left. A dark vehicle moving at a speed entirely inconsistent with the residential road it was on. Not reckless, not drunk, simply a driver whose attention had drifted 1 second too long to the phone mounted on his dashboard. 1 second too long away from the road, 1 second too long away from the girl running across the intersection in the dark. Zara saw the headlights. That was all she had time for. A single image, 2 white lights expanding toward her with impossible speed, and then the impact which she would later have no memory of, because the human mind does something merciful in the instant of great trauma and simply steps out of the room. She was airborne briefly. She came down hard. And then the sidewalk was cold against her cheek, and the orange streetlights were spinning slowly above her, and there were sounds. A car door, footsteps running, a man's voice saying something urgent and low. But they were coming from very far away, from another world almost, from a place her mind was no longer fully connected to. She tried to speak. What came out was barely a sound. The footsteps reached her. Someone knelt beside her. A hand, careful, deliberate, touched her shoulder. "Hey, hey, can you hear me? I've got you, you're okay. I've got you." She tried to find the voice, tried to focus. Above her, a face came into view. Dark-skinned, sharp-featured, somewhere in his 30s, with eyes that were wide and frightened in the way that people's eyes get frightened when they have caused something they cannot undo and know it. "Don't move," he said. I called 911. Stay with me. What's your name? Zara opened her mouth. She searched. The search returned nothing. Not confusion, not the disorientation of someone who has momentarily forgotten. A deeper absence than that. A blankness as total and clean as a whiteboard that has never been written on. She looked up at the man above her. I don't, she whispered. She tried again. I don't know. The man's expression changed. Something moved across his face. Fear, then something more complicated than fear. The sirens were already approaching. The January night pressed close and cold around them both. And Zara Mitchell, who had survived a car crash that took her parents, who had survived months of exploitation in her aunt's house, who had run barefoot into the night to reclaim her own life, lay on a sidewalk in East Point, Georgia, with no name, no past, no memory of any of the battles she had already won, and no idea that the man kneeling over her, the man whose hands were already pressing his jacket gently beneath her head, the man whose voice was low and steady and terrified, was about to become the most important person in her life. There is a certain kind of mercy in forgetting. The doctors would explain it later with clinical precision. Blunt force trauma, temporary retrograde amnesia, unpredictable recovery timeline. And those words would float in the air of the hospital room like objects that didn't quite belong. But the truth beneath the science was simpler. Zara's mind had been carrying so much grief, fear, exhaustion, the weight of survival, for so long that when the impact came, something inside her simply let it go. All of it. The crash that took her parents. The house with the cold walls. Gloria's face when the mask fell. Damon Wills and his ringed fingers. The $47 in the lining of her backpack. The notebook with the color-coded law school plan. Gone. Wiped clean. Like a life that had been too heavy to carry any further. And into that emptiness, that terrifying, total, absolute emptiness, walked a man named Nathan Cole, with a hospital room and a quiet voice and a decision he hadn't planned to make. A decision that would change everything. For both of them. The paramedics had arrived in 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Nathan knew this because he had counted. He had knelt beside the girl on the pavement and kept one hand hovering just above her shoulder, close enough to offer presence. Careful enough not to cause further injury, and he had counted seconds the way he counted everything in his life. Precisely, obsessively, as a way of imposing order on situations that refused to be ordered. 4 minutes and 30 seconds. He had talked to her the entire time. Not about anything meaningful. Just words, steady and low, the kind of sounds you make to let someone know they are not alone in the dark. He wasn't sure she could hear him. He wasn't sure it mattered. He kept talking anyway. He rode in his car behind the ambulance to Grady Memorial, refused to leave, refused to go home, refused every reasonable suggestion that there was nothing more he could do tonight, and that he should let the hospital do its work and call in the morning. I'm not leaving, he said, simply, finally, and no one argued further. Nathan Cole had that quality. The quality of a man whose decisions, once made, occupied the room so completely that the space for counter-argument simply ceased to exist. He sat in the emergency waiting area in a gray cashmere coat that cost more than most people's monthly rent, surrounded by plastic chairs and fluorescent lighting and the particular organized chaos of a city hospital at 1 a.m. And he waited. He was not accustomed to waiting. He was accustomed to being the person other people waited for. But he sat, and he was still, and he waited. Nathan Cole was 34 years old. He was the founder and CEO of Cole Capital Group, a private investment firm headquartered in Midtown Atlanta, with satellite offices in New York, Chicago, and Houston. The firm managed assets across real estate, technology, and infrastructure, and had posted returns that made financial journalists use words like remarkable and almost unreasonable in the same sentence. His personal net worth, as of the previous quarter's valuation, was approximately $2.1 billion. He had grown up in Mechanicsville, one of Atlanta's oldest historically black neighborhoods 4 miles from where he currently sat, in a 2-bedroom apartment with his mother, Carolyn Cole, who had worked as a hotel housekeeper for 26 years and raised her son alone after his father decided, when Nathan was 6, that fatherhood was a role he preferred to admire from a distance. Carolyn Cole had 3 rules. Work harder than everyone expects you to. Never let anyone make you feel like you don't belong in any room. And always, always stop when someone needs help. That last rule was why Nathan was sitting in a plastic chair at Grady Memorial at 1:30 in the morning instead of in the penthouse of his Buckhead residence. His mother had built that into him so deep it was structural. You stop, you stay, you help. He had done extraordinary things with the first two rules. Built a firm from a business plan written in a Mechanicsville library at 19. Fought for every deal, every room, every seat at every table that the world suggested. Wasn't for someone who looked like him or came from where he came from. Proved repeatedly, and sometimes brutally, that he belonged everywhere he decided to stand. But the third rule, the stopping, the staying, that was the one that had cost him the most. Because Nathan Cole had stopped for people before, had stayed, had helped, and had learned through a series of experiences that left quiet scars behind his composed exterior that the world did not always meet sincerity with sincerity. He had been used, manipulated, approached with need that was actually strategy in disguise. And so, over the years, the man who stopped and stayed had built walls around that instinct. Not destroyed it. Carolyn Cole's lessons couldn't be destroyed, but managed it, controlled it, applied it carefully, selectively, from behind glass, until tonight. Tonight, the glass was gone, and he had no explanation for why. Only that there was something about the girl on the pavement. Something in the way she had looked up at him with those dark eyes that held absolutely nothing. No recognition, no name, no past, and something in the way that emptiness had hit him in the chest like a physical thing, like looking at someone who had been stripped of everything and recognizing it. At 2:14 a.m., a doctor came through the double doors. She was a compact woman in her 50s, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the particular economy of movement that belongs to people who have been on their feet for 12 hours and have learned not to waste a single step. "Are you family?" she asked Nathan, looking at her clipboard. "No," Nathan said. "I was the driver. I'm the one who called it in." The doctor looked at him over her glasses. "She's stable," she said. "Laceration on the left temple, bruised ribs, mild concussion." She was lucky. The speed differential was low. The impact was glancing. It could have been significantly worse. Nathan exhaled slowly. "She's going to be fine physically," the doctor continued. However, Nathan looked up. She presented with significant retrograde amnesia upon arrival. She was unable to provide her name, her address, any identifying information whatsoever. We found no ID on her, no phone. Just a backpack with some cash and a few personal items. Nathan was quiet for a moment. "She doesn't remember who she is?" "She doesn't remember anything prior to waking up in our care," the doctor confirmed. "This type of amnesia can be temporary. Sometimes it resolves in hours, sometimes days, sometimes longer. Every case is different." "What happens to her if she doesn't remember?" Nathan asked. "Practically, what happens?" The doctor took a breath. "We contact social services. She's a minor, 17, we estimate, based on physical examination. Without identification, without family presenting, she would likely be placed in emergency foster care while the county attempts to establish her identity." The words emergency foster care landed in the room and sat there. Nathan said nothing for a moment. He thought about Mechanicsville, about his mother's 3 rules, about the glass he had built around his instinct to stop and stay and help. Then he said, "Can I see her?" She was sitting up slightly when he entered. Not lying flat, sitting up, which the nurse had apparently encouraged, and which she had apparently insisted upon with a quiet firmness that had impressed the nursing staff. A girl who didn't know her own name but knew she preferred to face the room upright. She was younger than she had seemed on the pavement. In the harsh hospital light, with the bandage at her left temple and the hospital gown replacing the 2 layers of clothes she'd been wearing, she looked exactly like what she was. A teenager. Someone who should have been worrying about college applications and weekend plans and the completely ordinary disasters of being 17. Instead, she was staring at the wall across from her with the focused, interior expression of someone conducting a very serious search of a very empty room. She turned when Nathan came in. Her eyes, dark brown, sharp even now, even emptied of everything that had previously filled them, moved over him with quick assessment, taking in the cashmere coat, the quiet posture, the fact that he was not a doctor or a nurse. "You were there," she said, "not a question. On the street. You were the one talking to me." "Yes," Nathan said. He stopped a respectful distance from the bed. "I'm Nathan Cole. I was driving the car." Something moved across her face, not anger, exactly. More like the careful receiving of a fact that needed to be stored somewhere before she could decide what to do with it. "The doctor said I don't remember things," she said. "That's what they told me too. Do you know who I am?" Nathan shook his head slowly. "No, I didn't know you before tonight." She absorbed this, looked down at her hands. They were resting on the blanket in front of her. Steady, not ringing, not fidgeting. Still hands. A composed person inhabiting an incomprehensible situation with a dignity that Nathan found, in that moment, quietly remarkable. "Then why are you here?" she asked. She glanced at the clock on the wall, almost 3 in the morning. Nathan was quiet for a beat. "My mother had a rule," he said finally. "You stop when someone needs help. You stay." The girl looked at him. For the first time since he had entered the room, something shifted in her expression, not softening exactly, more like recognition of a value, of a principle she had heard somewhere before in a voice she could no longer place. "She sounds like a good person," she said quietly. "The best I've ever known," Nathan said. Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable. The particular silence of two people who are strangers to each other, but have, in some unspoken way, already decided the other is safe. "They're going to put me somewhere," she said. It wasn't a question. Social services, foster care. That's what happens, right? That's what they said would happen, yes. She nodded slowly, processing. Her jaw was set in a way that suggested she was holding something back. Not tears necessarily, but something larger. The full weight of the situation, held at arm's length by sheer discipline. Nathan looked at her for a moment, and then he did what Carolyn Cole had raised him to do. He stopped calculating. He stopped managing. He stopped making the careful, controlled decisions of a man who had learned to keep his instincts behind glass. "You don't have to go into the system," he said. She looked at him. "I have a home," Nathan said. "It's large. There's staff. It's safe. You can stay while you recover, while your memory comes back, and I'll make sure you have everything you need. No conditions, no obligations, just a safe place." The girl stared at him. "You don't know me," she said. "No," Nathan agreed, "but you don't know yourself right now either. And everybody deserves at least one person willing to hold space for them while they figure it out." The room was very quiet. The monitor beeped steadily beside her. Outside in the corridor, the hospital moved and breathed around them. Shoes on linoleum, distant voices, the organized machinery of a place dedicated to putting broken things back together. She looked at Nathan Cole for a long time. This man who had stayed until 3 in the morning. This man whose mother had a rule. This man who was offering something she had no framework to evaluate, because she had no framework for anything at all. "Why?" she asked. One word. Direct and honest and completely without performance. Nathan held her gaze. "Because the last thing you need right now," he said quietly, "is to be alone in a system that doesn't know your name either." Something broke open, just slightly, in her expression. Not collapse. Nothing so dramatic, just a small controlled crack in the composure, a momentary visibility of how exhausted she was, how frightened, how completely, devastatingly unmoored. She pressed her lips together, looked down at her hands again, then looked back up. "I don't have a name to give you," she said. Nathan almost smiled. "Then we'll find you one," he said, "temporarily, until yours comes back." She was quiet for another moment. Then, barely audible, barely there, but present, "Okay," she said. Nathan Cole's primary Atlanta residence was a penthouse spanning the top 2 floors of a building in Buckhead with views of the city that, on clear days, seemed to go on forever. It had 11 rooms. A full kitchen with a private chef named Gerald who came 4 days a week. A housekeeper named Miss Vera who had worked for Nathan for 6 years and regarded him with the specific fond exasperation of someone who knows a person better than that person knows themselves. A home office with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a standing desk and a photograph of Carolyn Cole in a silver frame on the corner of it. And a guest suite, large, warm, south-facing, with windows that let the morning light in like something intentional that had never once been used. Until now. The girl, whom Nathan had temporarily, gently, suggested they call Zara since she had found the name printed in small letters inside the cover of the notebook in her backpack, though she couldn't remember writing it, stood in the doorway of the guest suite and looked at it for a very long time without speaking. Then she turned to Nathan. "This is the guest room?" "Yes, your guest room. That's correct." She looked back at it, at the bed with the good linen, at the desk by the window, at the morning light already pooling on the hardwood floor. "Okay," she said for the second time. And Nathan, standing in the hallway, watching her take in the first safe space she had inhabited in longer than she currently knew, felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time, something dangerously close to purpose. Miss Vera would later say to her sister over the phone, in the privacy of her own kitchen, that she knew from the very first morning. The way the girl came out of the guest suite at 7 a.m., already dressed, already composed, and asked, not where the food was, not what the Wi-Fi password was, but whether there was anything that needed doing. "I'm not good at sitting still," she had told Miss Vera matter-of-factly, "even if I can't remember why." And Miss Vera had handed her a cup of coffee and looked at her for a long moment and thought, "Lord, this child has been through something." And she had also thought, "This child is going to be just fine." But between those two things, between the something she had been through and the fine she was going to be, there was a story that neither of them could see yet. A story that was only now, quietly and without announcement, beginning to unfold. Nathan Cole sat in his home office that first morning, ostensibly reviewing quarterly reports, and found himself pausing every few minutes to listen to the sounds coming from the kitchen. The girl's voice, low, a little careful, asking Miss Vera something. Miss Vera's laugh in response. The ordinary sounds of a home being inhabited by more than one person. He couldn't remember the last time his home had sounded like that. He turned back to his reports. But the sounds followed him, and something in his chest, something he had managed and controlled and kept behind glass for a very long time, shifted, just slightly, just enough. The first thing Nathan noticed was that she was always awake before him. This was not something he had anticipated. Nathan Cole operated on a disciplined schedule that began at 5:45 a.m., 30 minutes of exercise, 15 minutes of reading, breakfast at 6:45, first calls by 7:30. He had maintained this routine for 11 years with the consistency of someone who understood that structure was not a luxury but a form of self-preservation. He came out of his bedroom on the third morning of Zara's residence to find the kitchen already inhabited. She was sitting at the kitchen island with a cup of coffee. Miss Vera had shown her where everything was on day one, and she had absorbed the information with the focused attention of someone determined not to be a burden. And she had Gerald's note in front of her, and she was writing something, not idly, deliberately, with the focused interior posture of someone deep in thought. She looked up when he appeared. "Morning," she said. "Morning," Nathan replied, slightly thrown by the presence of another person in his kitchen at 5:50 a.m. "You're up early." "I'm always up early, apparently," she said. "My body just does it. I don't know why." She said things like that sometimes. Apparently. I don't know why. I'm not sure where that comes from. Small acknowledgments of the gap between who she was and who she could remember being. She said them without self-pity, which Nathan found remarkable. Just observation. The matter-of-fact accounting of a person doing inventory. "What are you writing?" he asked, moving to the coffee maker. She looked down at the notepad. "Things I know," she said. "Things that feel true even if I can't remember learning them. I figured if I write them down I can start building a picture." Nathan poured his coffee, looked at her over the rim of the mug. "What kind of things?" She turned the notepad slightly so he could see. He leaned forward to read. The list said, "I believe in justice. I don't like being idle. I think the law matters, and that it should protect people, not just punish them. I get angry when powerful people exploit vulnerable ones. I am not afraid of hard work. I miss someone, maybe two people. I don't know their faces, but I feel them." Nathan read the list twice. He straightened up slowly. "That's not a small list," he said. "No," she agreed. "Turns out I have opinions." He almost smiled, caught it, turned back to his coffee. But the list stayed with him all day. It started because of a news segment. Nathan had a habit of watching the evening news while eating dinner. A solitary ritual, Gerald's food consumed in the company of cable news, which Miss Vera privately considered one of the saddest things she had ever witnessed and had said so to his face more than once. On the 7th evening of Zara's residence, she appeared in the doorway of the sitting room during the broadcast, a plate of food in hand. Gerald had started making enough for two without being asked, which Nathan had noticed and said nothing about, and she stood watching the screen. The segment was about a wrongful conviction case in Alabama. A black man, 51 years old, who had spent 23 years in prison for a crime the evidence now clearly showed he had not committed. The camera showed him walking out of the facility into sunlight, blinking, disoriented. His mother, 90 years old, small and fierce and weeping, meeting him at the gate. Zara stood in the doorway and watched this and said nothing, but her jaw was tight, her eyes were bright. "You can sit down," Nathan said. She came in and sat in the armchair across from him. They watched the rest of the segment together. When it ended, Zara said, quietly, not to Nathan specifically, more to the room, 23 years. And they just walk him out like it's a transaction, no accountability, no real reckoning. Just, here, you're free now, as if freedom undoes what they took. Nathan looked at her. It doesn't, he agreed. The system needs people inside it who actually believe it should work for everyone, she said. Not just people who are good at working the system. You sound like someone who's thought about this before, Nathan said carefully. She paused. I feel like I have, she said. I feel like this is something I've cared about. For a long time. I just can't remember when it started or why. She looked at the blank screen. But the caring is still there, she said. Whatever I've forgotten, I didn't forget that. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, and he wasn't entirely sure why he said it, since he was not generally a man who volunteered personal history. My mother used to say that your values are the last thing life takes from you. That circumstances can take your money, your health, your people. But what you believe, what you really believe, that's yours. Zara looked at him. She sounds extraordinary, she said. She was, Nathan said. She passed 4 years ago. I'm sorry, Zara said. And she said it the way people say it when they actually mean it. Not as a social reflex, but as a genuine offering of recognition. I see your loss. I acknowledge its weight. Nathan looked at her for a moment. Thank you, he said. And something in the room shifted, barely perceptibly, barely there, like a door opening somewhere down a long hallway. The specific shift that happens between two people when they stop being strangers and become something without a clean name yet. Something that is simply less alone. Nathan's penthouse had a room that Zara found on her 9th day of residence behind a door she had assumed was a closet. It was not a closet. It was a library. Floor-to-soiling bookshelves on 3 walls. A rolling ladder on a brass track. 2 deep leather chairs with a reading lamp between them and a window seat overlooking the city that was, in Zara's immediate assessment, the single greatest thing she had yet encountered in her memoryless existence. She stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then she walked in slowly, running her fingers along the spines of books the way a person runs their fingers along the keys of a piano they used to play. Law, history, economics, philosophy, biography, African-American literature and history filling an entire wall. James Baldwin, Ida B. Wells, W.E.B. Du Bois, Michelle Alexander, Brian Stevenson, Bell Hooks, Ta-Nehisi Coates. Shelved not as a collection but as a conversation, worn spines and dog-eared pages suggesting they had been read rather than displayed. Her hand stopped on a spine. Just Mercy, Brian Stevenson. She pulled it from the shelf, opened it. And something happened that she couldn't explain, a warmth, a recognition, something that lived below memory in the body's own archive. Her eyes filled. She blinked it back quickly, pressing her lips together. She didn't know why this book made her feel that way. She just knew that it did. She took it to the window seat and read for 4 hours without stopping. Nathan found her there when he came home from the office at 7 p.m., still in the window seat, the city glowing behind her, the book in her lap and her knees pulled up, and her expression carrying the particular absorption of someone who is not reading words but receiving them. He stood in the doorway of the library for a moment before she noticed him, and he thought, though he would not have been able to articulate it then, that she looked entirely at home. more at home than he had ever felt in this room himself. "I hope it's all right that I came in here," she said when she saw him. "This room exists to be used," he said. "I'm glad someone is finally using it." She held up the book. "This one," she said. "I don't know how I know it, but I know it." Nathan leaned against the doorframe. "Brian Stevenson," he said. "He founded the Equal Justice Initiative. He spent his career fighting for people the system forgot." Zara looked down at the cover. "People the system forgot," she repeated softly. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I want to be someone like that," she said, not grandly, not performatively, just stated, like a fact she had rediscovered rather than invented. "Like Brian Stevenson? Like someone who stands between vulnerable people and the thing that wants to crush them," she said. "I don't know where that want comes from, but it's the most solid thing in me right now, the most certain." Nathan looked at her for a long, quiet moment. "Then that's where we start," he said. She looked up. "I have a friend who runs a legal aid foundation," he said. "Dr. Patricia Okafor. If you want, when you're feeling stronger, I can introduce you, just to talk, just to be around that world while your memory finds its way back." Zara stared at him. "Why are you doing all of this?" she asked. "And I don't mean the roof and the food. I mean this." "You don't have to do this." Nathan was quiet for a beat. "No," he agreed. "I don't." He didn't offer anything further, but the answer sat between them with a weight that both of them felt and neither of them named. Not yet. Miss Vera had worked for Nathan Cole for 6 years. In that time, she had learned several things about him with absolute certainty. He took his coffee black. He worked too many hours. He ate Gerald's extraordinary food without ever really tasting it, because he was always thinking about something else. He was generous, quietly, consistently, without theater, with his money, his time, and his resources. And he was, beneath all of it, profoundly lonely in the way that people become lonely when they are surrounded by people who want things from them rather than people who simply want them. She had worried about him in the particular way that a woman who has watched someone for 6 years and grown fond of them worries, without saying too much, without overstepping, but with a steady background concern that occasionally expressed itself in extra food or a pointed look or a comment delivered with the cheerful directness of someone who has earned the right. And then Zara arrived, and Miss Vera watched. She watched Nathan come home from the office 40 minutes earlier than his average, 3 days in the second week. She watched him linger at the kitchen island in the mornings instead of taking his coffee directly to his office. She watched him in the library doorway that evening, standing there looking at the girl in the window seat with an expression Miss Vera had genuinely never seen on his face before. Open, unguarded, almost young. She said nothing to Nathan about any of this, but she started making his favorite meals more often, because something told her he was finally going to start tasting them. Gerald, for his part, had simply begun cooking for 2 from day 3, without discussion or announcement, expanding his portions, adding dishes that instinct told him a young person would appreciate, leaving small things on the counter with handwritten notes. Peach cobbler, still warm. Don't let Mr. Cole tell you he's not having any, he will. Zara read these notes and smiled, and brought Nathan a portion of cobbler in his office that evening, setting it on his desk without comment. He looked up from his laptop. She had already turned to leave. "Gerald said you'd say you weren't having any," she said over her shoulder, "so I didn't ask." Nathan looked at the cobbler, then at the empty doorway, then at the cobbler again. He ate every bite. By the 3rd week, dinner had become a shared event without either of them formally deciding it should be. It simply evolved. The way things evolve between 2 people who are spending significant time in the same space and have stopped pretending they aren't aware of each other. Gerald set 2 places without being asked. Nathan no longer ate in front of the news, and Zara, who had been careful in those early days not to impose, not to take up more space than she had been offered, gradually, tentatively, allowed herself to simply be present. They talked during dinner about everything and nothing. Nathan explained his work to her, not with the condensed, impressive version he gave investors, but the real version, the complicated version, the version that included the parts he found genuinely difficult, and the parts that kept him up at night, and the parts that, when they worked, felt like what his mother had always told him work should feel like something that mattered beyond the transaction. Zara listened with the complete quality attention of someone with no distractions, no phone history to scroll, no social media, no past anxieties bleeding into the present moment. Just listening. Asking questions that were sharp and perceptive, and sometimes made Nathan stop mid-sentence because they had identified something he hadn't quite articulated to himself yet. "You're not doing this just for profit," she said one evening, when he had been talking about a community infrastructure project his firm was funding in Southwest Atlanta. "You're trying to fix something." Nathan looked at her. "What makes you say that?" "The way you talk about where you grew up," she said. "Mechanicsville. You mention it carefully, like it's something precious and something painful at the same time." Nathan was quiet. "You notice things," he said. "I don't have a past to distract me," she said simply, "so I pay attention to what's in front of me." What was in front of her most evenings was Nathan Cole. And what was in front of Nathan Cole, slowly, undeniably, with the patient inevitability of something real, was a person who saw him, not the net worth, not the firm, not the carefully maintained image of a man who had everything handled, just him. And for a man who had been the most seen and the most invisible person in every room for most of his adult life, that was something he didn't have a word for yet. But his chest knew what it was. It was Miss Vera who noticed first. She mentioned it to Nathan on a Thursday morning, casually, while he was getting his briefcase. The way she mentioned things she considered important, but didn't want to make dramatic. "Someone was outside last night," she said, "parked across the street, dark SUV, sat there for about 40 minutes around 11 p.m. Nathan looked up. "Did you get a plate?" "Partial," she said, and handed him a slip of paper with 4 numbers and a letter written in her neat handwriting. Nathan looked at it. "Could be nothing," Miss Vera said. "Probably nothing." She said, "Probably the way people say probably when they mean I don't think so, but I hope I'm wrong." Nathan folded the slip of paper and put it in his pocket. "Don't mention this to Zara," he said. Miss Vera looked at him. "Nathan?" "Not yet," he said. "She's just starting to feel safe. I don't want to take that from her before I know what we're actually dealing with." Miss Vera pressed her lips together in the expression she reserved for when she disagreed with him but was choosing her battles. "Fine," she said, "but whatever that is out there, it found her fast." Nathan walked to the window and looked down at the empty street below. The SUV was gone, but the space where it had been felt occupied still. Something was circling, something from a past that Zara couldn't remember, but that remembered her perfectly, and it was getting closer. That night, Nathan sat in his home office long after the rest of the penthouse had gone quiet. He looked at the photograph of his mother in the silver frame on the corner of his desk. Carolyn Cole looked back at him, mid-law, caught in an unguarded moment at a family cookout years ago, wearing a yellow dress and holding a paper plate and being completely, joyfully herself. "You stop, you stay, you help." He had stopped, he had stayed. He was helping. But his mother, in her wisdom, had never specified what happened when helping someone meant standing between them and something dangerous. She hadn't needed to, because Nathan Cole, the boy from Mechanicsville who had fought for every room, every seat, every table, had never in his life walked away from something simply because it was difficult. He picked up his phone, called his head of security. "I need eyes on the building," he said quietly, "starting tonight, and I need you to run a partial plate for me." He read the numbers off the slip of paper. Then he hung up, and he sat in the quiet of his office and listened to the sounds of the penthouse around him, Miss Vera's distant footsteps, the city's permanent murmur 12 floors below, and from somewhere down the hall, the barely there sound of a page turning. Zara, still reading, still here, still safe, for now. It was a Saturday in February when Atlanta decided to remind everyone that winter still had opinions. The temperature dropped overnight into the 20s. Unusual for the city, unusual enough that Miss Vera had arrived that morning with an extra layer and a commentary on climate that lasted the full length of the elevator ride up. Gerald had responded to the cold the way he responded to all of life's challenges, by cooking. By 8 a.m., the pent smelled of buttermilk biscuits and smothered chicken and something sweet and warm that turned out to be homemade hot chocolate, which he had placed in a large pot on the stove with a handwritten note that said, For everyone. No exceptions. Yes, Mr. Cole, that means you too. Nathan came out of his bedroom at his usual time and stopped at the entrance to the kitchen. Zara was already there. This was no longer surprising. She was always there first, and he had quietly restructured his morning expectations to include her presence the way you restructure a room to include a piece of furniture that turns out to belong there more naturally than anything you had before. What was different this morning was that she was laughing, really laughing, not the careful, small laugh she offered in polite moments, but a full, genuine, unguarded laugh that came from somewhere deep and real and completely unmanaged. Gerald had apparently said something. He was at the stove with his back to the room, shoulders shaking with his own amusement, and Zara was laughing in a way that took up space and made no apology for it. Nathan stood at the entrance to the kitchen and felt something happen in his chest. Something sudden and quiet and completely without his consent. She hadn't noticed him yet. He had approximately 3 seconds of watching her be completely, entirely herself, head tilted back slightly, one hand pressed flat on the island countertop, that laugh filling the kitchen like something the room had been waiting for. Before she turned and saw him, the laugh settled into a smile. "Gerald made hot chocolate," she said. "He's refusing to call it anything other than a medical necessity. It is a medical necessity," Gerald said firmly, without turning around. "February in Atlanta with no hot chocolate is a public health crisis." Nathan moved to the coffee maker, found, without surprise, that his mug was already filled. Zara had clearly done it when she heard him coming down the hall the way she had started doing somewhere in the second week, without comment or ceremony. He picked up the mug. He looked at her. She had already looked away, back to whatever she and Gerald had been discussing. Nathan drank his coffee and said nothing. But something had shifted. And he knew, with the same instinct that had made him successful in every room he had ever entered, that it was not shifting back. It was Zara who suggested it. "I want to walk," she said after breakfast, looking at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows, with an expression of someone who has been inside long enough. "I know it's cold. I don't care about the cold." Nathan looked at her. His security team had reported nothing further on the partial plate. The number had traced to a rental agency, which traced to a name that traced to nothing concrete, which was itself a kind of answer, just not the kind you could act on yet. He had been quietly careful about Zara's movements outside the building, offering reasons that had nothing to do with his actual concern. But it was Saturday. He had no meetings, and something about the idea of Zara locked in the penthouse indefinitely felt wrong, in a way he was increasingly unwilling to accommodate. "Piedmont Park," he said. "We can walk there." She turned from the window. "You're coming? Is that a problem?" She considered him for a moment with that direct, assessing look he had come to recognize as her default mode of engaging with the world. "No," she said. "That's not a problem. Piedmont Park in February is a different creature from its summer self. The trees are stripped and architectural against a pewter sky, the lake a flat gray mirror, the paths populated by only the most committed walkers, people with good coats and places to be, and the particular Atlanta stubbornness that refuses to concede to temperatures below 30. Nathan and Zara walked side by side along the main path, hands in pockets, breath visible in the cold air. His security, 2 people, discreet, maintaining distance, were somewhere behind them, invisible enough that Zara didn't notice them, present enough that Nathan's attention was not entirely consumed by surveillance, which left room for conversation. And conversation between these 2 people had become something Nathan looked forward to with an intensity that he was only now beginning to admit to himself. "Tell me about Mechanicsville," Zara said. Nathan glanced at her. "What about it?" "Everything," she said simply. "You mention it and then you stop yourself. Like there's more, but you've decided it's too much." Nathan was quiet for a moment, looked at the path ahead. "It's not too much," he said finally. "It's just mine. I don't share it often." "You don't have to," she said immediately. "I shouldn't have." "No," he said. "I want to." That surprised him. The truth of it surprised him. He took a breath of cold air. "We had an apartment on McDaniel Street," he said. "My mother and me. 2nd floor. The kind of place where the heat worked when it wanted to, and the neighbors were loud but not mean. Just living, you know. Just doing the business of being alive at close range. Zara nodded. My mother worked nights mostly, he continued. Hotel housekeeping. She'd come home at 2, 3 in the morning, and I'd hear the door and I'd pretend to be asleep, but I always waited up, just to know she was home. He paused. She never knew I did that. She probably knew, Zara said quietly. Nathan looked at her. Mothers always know, Zara said. And then something moved across her face, a flicker, brief and unguarded. Pain, recognition, something from the locked room. Are you all right? Nathan asked. She blinked, returned. I think I did that too, she said slowly. Waited up for someone, I can feel it. The waiting. Lying still and listening for the sound of a door. She pressed her lips together. I can't see the face, she said, but I can feel the love. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, Nathan said. They walked in silence for a moment, not uncomfortable silence, but the particular silence of two people holding something fragile between them and moving carefully so as not to disturb it. She sounds like she was wonderful, Zara said. Your mother. She was the architecture, Nathan said. Everything I built, the firm, the work, the way I try to move through the world, it's all built on what she gave me. I'm just the contractor. She was the blueprint. Zara stopped walking. Nathan stopped too, turning to look at her. She was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen from her before. Something that was very still and very full at the same time. You're not what I would have expected, she said. Someone with everything you have. You're not what I would have expected. What would you have expected? Someone who forgot where they came from, she said, honestly. Someone who let the money build walls. Nathan looked at her. The money builds walls all by itself, he said. The work is keeping doors in them. Zara looked at him for another long moment. Then she started walking again. Tell me more about your mother, she said. And he did. For the rest of the walk, in the February cold, with their breath clouding the air between them and the city quiet around them. He talked about Carolyn Cole in a way he had not talked about her to anyone since her funeral. And Zara listened, the way she always listened, like what he was saying was the only thing in the world. March arrived and brought with it the first warmth of the approaching Atlanta spring, that tentative, hopeful warmth that shows up like an apology after a difficult winter, soft and uncertain, as if asking permission to stay. The penthouse felt different in March. Or perhaps it was simply that the people inside it were different. Nathan had quietly arranged for a tutor, a law professor from Emory named Dr. James Whitfield, a serious man in his 60s with a dry humor and a passion for constitutional law that bordered on devotional, to come to the penthouse 3 times a week. He had framed it carefully to Zara, not as charity, not as a project, but as something practical. You want to study law, he said. You've said so. Your memory may or may not come back on its own timeline. Why wait? Zara had looked at him for a long moment. You arranged this already, she said, before asking me. I arranged the option, he said. You can decline it. She hadn't declined it. And watching Zara Mitchell in a learning environment was, Nathan would later reflect, one of the most quietly astonishing things he had ever witnessed. She was, there was no more precise word for it, voracious. She consumed legal theory with an appetite that Dr. Whitfield described to Nathan over the phone after the 3rd session as genuinely one of the most naturally legally minded students I've encountered in 40 years of teaching. She argues like someone who's been preparing for years, he said. Her instincts around constitutional protections, around the intersection of race and law, around prosecutorial overreach, they're not the instincts of someone starting from zero. Whatever she's forgotten, she hasn't forgotten how to think. Nathan thanked him and hung up and sat with that for a moment. Whatever she's forgotten, she hasn't forgotten how to think. He went to the library doorway that evening. She was at the desk. Not the window seat anymore, but the desk. Books spread around her, Dr. Whitfield's notes beside them, her own handwriting filling the margins of a legal pad. She didn't hear him come. He stood there for a moment, watching her work, watching the focus and the intensity and the absolute commitment of someone who has found, even in the wreckage of an incomplete identity, the thing they are meant to do, and felt something he had been carefully not naming for weeks arrive with total clarity. He was in love with her. Not falling, not approaching. Already there, completely there. had been there for longer than he was willing to calculate. He stepped back from the doorway before she could see him, went to his office, sat down, and spent a very long time being extremely still and thinking about what, exactly, a responsible person did with this information. It was Zara who found him on the balcony. He had gone out after dinner, needing the city air, needing the distance of the view, needing the space that the outdoors provided for thoughts too large for interior rooms. He heard the glass door slide open behind him. "Miss Vera said you sometimes come out here when you need to think," Zara said. "I can go back inside. You can stay," he said. She came to stand beside him at the railing. The city spread below them, Atlanta's particular nighttime beauty, all light and distance, and the permanent motion of a city that never fully sleeps. The air was mild now. Spring had committed. Below them, Buckhead glittered and hummed. They stood in silence for several minutes. Good silence. Their silence, the kind they had built between them over weeks of conversation and meals and library evenings and morning coffee. "Can I ask you something?" Zara said. "Yes." "Are you lonely?" The question landed without warning. Nathan looked at her. She was looking at the city, not at him. Her profile in the glow of Atlanta below, serious, honest, unafraid of the question she had just asked, or the answer it might produce. "I was," he said. She turned to look at him then. "Was?" she said. He held her gaze. The city hummed below them. The night air moved between them. And everything that had been building for weeks, the morning coffees and the dinner conversations and the library doorway and the walk in Piedmont Park and the sound of her laugh in his kitchen, pressed forward all at once like something that had been holding itself back for as long as it reasonably could. "Things change," he said. Zara looked at him for a long, careful moment. "Nathan," she said, quietly. His name in her voice, which was different from his name anywhere else. More real somehow. More present. "I know," he said. "I know what I said I would be. A safe place? No conditions." "No, that's not what I was going to say," she said. He stopped. She looked back at the city. "I was going to say, I don't know who I was before," she said. "I don't know what my life looked like. I don't know the people who made me. I don't know if I've ever," she paused, choosing words carefully, "felt this way about anyone." The city below them offered nothing, just light and distance and the permanent motion of living things. "But I know what I feel right now," she said. "Right here, this is the only thing I'm certain of, that what I feel right now is real." Nathan was very still. "Zara, you don't have to say anything," she said quickly. "I'm not asking you to. I'm in love with you," he said. Silence. She turned to look at him fully. He met her eyes without flinching, without the management or the control or the glass. Just open. The most open he had been with another person in years. "You should know that," he said. "Whatever comes next, whatever your memory brings back, you should know that." Zara looked at him for a long time. Then something in her face, something that had been carefully, protectively composed for weeks, released. "I love you too," she said, simply, completely, without qualification. "I know that's complicated," she added. "I know I'm incomplete right now. I know there are things about me I can't give you because I can't remember them. But what I can give you, what's here right now, it's real. It's completely real." Nathan reached out. His hand found hers on the railing. She didn't pull away. They stood like that, side by side, hands linked, the city enormous and glittering below them, and said nothing more. Because nothing more needed saying. Love, when it finally arrives without pretense, doesn't need a speech. It just needs to be acknowledged, to be seen, to be held. Nathan was almost asleep when his phone buzzed. His head of security. "Marcus Webb," he answered immediately. "Talk to me." Marcus's voice was low and controlled, the voice of a professional delivering information that requires immediate attention without triggering panic. "The SUV is back," Marcus said. Same partial plate. But this time there were 2 occupants. "We got a clearer image on the building cameras. Send it." The image arrived on his phone 30 seconds later. Nathan sat up in bed and looked at it. 2 figures in the front of a dark vehicle. The driver, large, heavy-set, rings visible even in the grainy camera image. And in the passenger seat, a woman, older, upright posture, an expression, even at this distance and resolution, of someone who believed they were owed something. Nathan stared at the image. He didn't know these people. But somewhere in his building, in a south-facing guest suite with good linen and morning light, was a girl with no memory. And Nathan Cole was suddenly, completely certain of one thing. These people knew her, and whatever they wanted, it was not her well-being. He sat in the dark of his bedroom for a long time after that, thinking, not about the SUV, not about the grainy image on his phone, but about what Zara had said on the balcony 2 hours ago. What I can give you, what's here right now, it's real. It's completely real. Her past was out there in the dark, circling, getting closer. And when it arrived, when memory returned, or when the people in that vehicle found their way to her, everything would change. The question was not whether it was coming. The question was what kind of man Nathan Cole intended to be when it got here. He already knew the answer. His mother had given it to him a long time ago. You stop, you stay, and then you fight. Nathan had left for the office at his usual time. This was new, or rather, newly difficult. In the weeks since the balcony, something had changed in the texture of their mornings. The coffees were the same, the conversations were the same, but there was something underneath the sameness now. A warmth, a weight, a mutual awareness that made the moment of departure feel different from what it had been before. He had paused at the library doorway that morning, briefcase in hand. "Dr. Whitfield comes at 11, he said. "I know," Zara said, without looking up from her reading. "Gerald left lunch in the refrigerator. I know that too. I'll be back by 6. She looked up then, held his gaze for a moment with that direct, unafraid look that he had come to understand was simply how she saw the world, without flinching, without performance. "I know," she said again, softer this time. He left, and Zara sat in the library and read and highlighted and filled her legal pad with notes and felt, in the particular, fragile way of someone who has found an unexpected harbor in a storm they are still technically inside. Something close to happiness. Miss Vera was in the kitchen. Gerald had gone for the morning. The penthouse was quiet and warm and lit with that extraordinary Atlanta spring light. It was, in all outward appearances, a perfect Thursday morning. Until the elevator at the end of the hall opened, Miss Vera heard it first. The elevator required a key card for residential floors. Nathan had been scrupulous about security in the weeks since Marcus Webb's report, and access to the penthouse level had been quietly tightened, which was why the sound of the elevator arriving at this floor at 10:17 a.m., when no delivery, no visitor, and no staff member was expected, brought Miss Vera out of the kitchen with a dish towel in her hand and her chin at the particular angle it assumed when she was ready to be unpleasant, if necessary. The elevator doors opened. 2 people stepped out. The first was a man, large, heavy-set, moving with the slow, deliberate confidence of someone who has not rushed for anything in a very long time because the world has always adjusted to his pace. He wore dark clothing and rings on most of his fingers, and an expression of calm, proprietary authority, the expression of a person who has arrived to collect something they are entirely certain belongs to them. Damon Wills. The second was a woman, pressed clothing, upright posture, gold jewelry at her ears. An expression that was composed and cold and arranged into something that was technically a smile, only in the most technical and meaningless sense of the word. Gloria Reeves. Miss Vera planted herself in the hallway like a small, formidable wall. "This is a private residence," she said. "I don't know how you got up here, but you need to go back down. We're here for the girl," Gloria said. Pleasantly, horribly pleasantly. "We know she's here. There's no need to make this difficult." "I don't know what girl you're talking about," Miss Vera said. "Yes, you do," Damon Wills said, simply, quietly. The quiet of someone who does not need to raise his voice, because the weight of what he carries does the work for him. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded document. "Legal guardianship," he said. "Gloria Reeves is the legal guardian of one Zara Mitchell, 17 years old, currently missing from her guardian's custody. This is a court document. You are currently harboring a minor." Miss Vera stared at the document. She didn't take it. "I'm going to need you to wait right here," she said. She turned and walked. Not ran, walked, because Miss Vera did not run for people like this, back toward the library. She appeared in the library doorway, and Zara looked up from the legal pad with the open expression of someone interrupted mid-thought. And then she saw Miss Vera's face. Miss Vera, who had never once in 6 years of Nathan's employment shown anything on her face that she did not choose to show, was showing something now. Fear. Controlled, professional, managed fear. But fear. There are two people in the hallway, Miss Vera said quietly. A man and a woman. They have a document. They're saying, but she didn't finish. Because Zara had gone completely still. Not the stillness of confusion, the stillness of recognition. Something was happening behind her eyes. Zara's hands had gone flat on the desk, her highlighter rolling away unnoticed, her face draining of the warmth it had been carrying all morning and replacing it with something older, something that lived beneath the amnesia, something that the body remembers even when the mind cannot. "What does the woman look like?" Zara asked. Her voice was very steady, very careful. Miss Vera described her. Zara closed her eyes, and the locked room opened. It did not come back gently. It did not drift in like a morning fog clearing gradually under sunlight. It came back the way a wave comes back, everything at once, with force, with weight, without regard for whether you are ready to receive it. Images, a church on Martin Luther King Jr., drive with full pews and 2 white caskets, a welcome mat that said blessed in yellow letters, a cot in a utility room with a bare bulb overhead, a kitchen before sunrise, hands in soapy water, body exhausted, mind still fighting. A woman's voice, your parents are gone, face reality, delivered without compassion, without apology, without anything except the cold efficiency of someone removing an obstacle. A man on a couch with rings on every finger looking at her like an item in a catalog. A door, running, cold pavement, dark streets. The desperate arithmetic of $47 and a cracked phone and nowhere certain to go. Her father's hand on a book cover. Her mother's laugh. Raymond, Diane. Their faces, which she had been reaching for in the dark for months, which had existed only as feeling and warmth, and an unnamed grief that sat in her chest like a stone. Their faces arrived with total clarity. Her father's eyes, her mother's smile, gone, both gone, since October. The wave crested. Zara Mitchell at the library desk in Nathan Cole's penthouse remembered everything she had ever been. She sat with it for exactly 30 seconds. 30 seconds of absolute interior silence while the full weight of her real life resettled inside her like furniture rearranging itself in a room that had been empty too long. Then she opened her eyes, stood up, straightened her spine, and walked down the hallway to face what had come for her. Gloria Reeves saw her coming and rearranged her face into something maternal and relieved. A performance so practiced it might have convinced someone who didn't know what lived behind it. "Zara," she said warmly. "Baby, we've been so worried. When you disappeared." "Stop," Zara said. Her voice was quiet, completely quiet. But something in it, something composed and clear and completely without fear, made Gloria stop mid-sentence as though a switch had been thrown. Zara looked at her aunt. She looked at her the way you look at someone when the mask is finally off, and you are seeing them without it for the first time and finding beneath it exactly what you always suspected. Nothing. Nothing worth the fear they inspired. Nothing worth the silence they demanded. Just a person. Small in their greed, exposed in their cruelty, ordinary in their moral failure. "I remember everything," Zara said. Gloria's performance shifted, adjusted. She reached for a new expression, concern, authority. "Zara, you've been missing for months. You're a minor. You need to come with us." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Zara said. "You don't have a choice," Damon Wills said. He stepped forward slightly, not threatening but occupying space the way men like him occupy space. As a reminder, legal guardianship. It's documented. Either you come willingly or we involve the authorities, and this becomes significantly more complicated for the man who's been harboring you. "Then involve the authorities," said a voice. Everyone turned. Nathan Cole was standing at the elevator. He had his phone in one hand. His expression was the expression of a man who has already made every decision that matters and is now simply executing. He had come back. Miss Vera had called him the moment she left the hallway. He had been 20 minutes from the office. He had turned the car around before she finished her second sentence. He walked down the hallway at his regular pace, unhurried, deliberate, completely in command of himself and therefore of the room. And he came to stand beside Zara. He didn't touch her, didn't need to, just beside her. "Nathan Cole," he said to the two people at the end of his hallway, "this is my home. I'd like you to explain who you are and what you believe gives you the right to be in it." Gloria straightened, produced the document. Legal guardianship of Zara Mitchell. I have 2 attorneys on their way up right now, Nathan said. They will review that document in detail. And while they're doing that, he held up his phone. I'd like you to know that I've spent the last several weeks building a very thorough understanding of the circumstances under which Zara left your custody, the conditions she was living in, the work she was compelled to perform without compensation. And his voice remained level, but something behind his eyes was not level at all. The arrangement you were attempting to make with Mr. Wills here before she fled. Silence. Complete silence. Gloria's expression flickered. Damon Wills' stillness changed quality, from confident to calculating. I don't know what she's told you, Gloria began. She hasn't told me anything, Nathan said. She remembered nothing for months. Everything I know, I found out through other means, which means what I know is documented, corroborated, and entirely independent of anything Zara has said. He put the phone in his pocket. My attorneys will be here in 4 minutes, he said. You're welcome to wait. Or you're welcome to leave and spend the time between now and what comes next deciding how you'd like to proceed. Gloria looked at Damon Wills. Damon Wills looked at Nathan Cole. And in that look, in the careful calculating assessment of a man measuring another man, something shifted. A recognition. The specific recognition of a predator encountering something that is not prey and recalibrating accordingly. This isn't over, Damon Wills said. No, Nathan agreed pleasantly. It isn't, but the next chapter of it will take place in a courtroom, where I have significantly more resources than you do. The elevator arrived. Gloria and Damon Wills stepped into it. The doors closed. The hallway was silent. Nathan turned to Zara. She was standing very straight, very still. Her face was composed, that extraordinary composure that was simply who she was. But her hands, at her sides, were not entirely steady. You came back, she said. Miss Vera called, he said. You didn't have to. Zara, he said quietly. She stopped. He looked at her, directly, completely, without the glass. I remember telling you, he said. You stop. You stay. Something broke open in her face then. Not collapse, not dramatic. Just the specific, exhausted, overwhelming relief of someone who has been fighting alone for so long that the presence of an ally undoes them more completely than any enemy ever could. Her eyes filled. She pressed her lips together. I remember everything, she said. Nathan, I remember all of it. My parents, my aunt, what she was doing, what she tried to. Her voice caught. I remember everything. I know, he said. I should have told you sooner, she said. When the memories started coming back, weeks ago, I should have. You were afraid, he said simply. She looked at him. Were you afraid of losing this, he asked. A tear broke free. She didn't wipe it. Yes, she whispered. Nathan looked at her for a long, quiet moment. Zara, he said, there is nothing you remember that changes what I told you on that balcony. Nothing. Do you understand that? She held his gaze and nodded, once, small, complete. Miss Vera, who had been standing at the kitchen doorway through all of this, turned and went quietly back inside. Later she would tell her sister, I've never seen that man's face look like that before. Like something finally cost him enough to matter. They sat in the library until midnight. Zara talked. Nathan listened. She told him everything. Not the fragments and feelings of a person with amnesia reaching for shapes in the dark, but the full, clear, detailed account of Zara Mitchell's life. Raymond and Diane, the accident on Cascade Avenue in the October rain, the hospital, Gloria's house, the utility room, the work, the silence. The night Gloria sat her in front of Damon Wills and told her to be grateful. The running, the $47, the cracked phone, the headlights. Nathan listened to all of it without interrupting, without reacting visibly, not because he wasn't reacting, but because she needed to say it more than he needed to respond to it, and he understood that. When she finished, the library was very quiet. I want to be angry, she said. I am angry. But mostly I'm just tired of being someone that people thought they could use. They were wrong, Nathan said. I know, she said. I've always known that, but knowing it doesn't always stop it from hurting. No, he agreed. It doesn't. She looked at him. What happens now? She said. Nathan leaned forward, clasped his hands. Now, he said, we make sure that what they did to you has consequences. Real ones, legal ones. I have attorneys, I have investigators, and I have documentation that I've been building for weeks. "You've been building it for weeks," she repeated. Since the SUV appeared outside the building, he confirmed. She stared at him. "You knew something was coming." "I suspected," he said. "I wanted to be ready." She was quiet for a moment. "You were protecting me," she said. "Yes, even then, before the balcony, before any of." "Yes." She looked at him with an expression that was very full and very still and completely without performance. "Nathan," she said. "Yes, thank you," she said. "Not for the house, not for the attorneys, not for the security team or the tutor or Gerald's cooking or Miss Vera's presence. For all of it, for the totality of it. For being the kind of man who stops, who stays, who fights." Nathan held her gaze. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "We have work to do." That night, for the first time in months, Zara Mitchell cried. Really cried. Not the controlled, managed, surface-level tears of someone maintaining composure under pressure, but the deep, necessary, long-overdue grief of someone who has finally reached a place safe enough to fall apart in. She cried for Raymond Mitchell, for his hand on a book cover and his voice across a kitchen table, and his belief in her that had never wavered and had been taken from the world on a rainy October night before she ever got to show him what she would become. She cried for Diane Mitchell, for that laugh that started in the stomach, for Sunday morning hair braiding and gospel songs hummed under the breath and the specific, irreplaceable safety of a mother's presence. She cried for the months in the utility room, for the $47, for the worn copy of Just Mercy left behind in the dark. And then, when the grief had moved through her the way grief needs to move, like weather, like a storm that requires completion, she stopped, she breathed, she was still. And into the stillness came something she recognized from her father's kitchen table, from the worn pages of books, from the color-coded law school folder that had once lived on a laptop in a house that was gone. Determination, not rage, not desperation, clear, clean, structural determination. They don't get to win, not Gloria, not Damon Wills. Not the system that looked away while a 17-year-old girl was worked and silenced and nearly sold. Not any of them. They don't get to win. Because Zara Mitchell was no longer running. She was no longer hiding. She was no longer invisible. She was here, she was loved, she was remembered. And she was, for the first time since the night the rain refused to stop on Cascade Avenue, ready. The law firm of Caldwell, Harris and Associates occupied the 14th floor of a glass tower on Peachtree Street that had, in Nathan Cole's considered opinion, exactly the right amount of intimidation built into its architecture. Not ostentatious, not theatrical. Just quietly, absolutely serious. The kind of building that said, without saying anything, "The people inside this building are not playing." Lead attorney Diane Caldwell, 53 years old, Howard University Law, 26 years of litigation experience. The kind of woman who wore reading glasses on a chain and had never once in her professional life raised her voice because she had never needed to. Sat across the conference table from Nathan and Zara and spread a series of documents between them with the practiced efficiency of someone laying cards on a table and knowing, before the hand is played, exactly what the outcome will be. "Here is what we have," she said. She walked them through it. 14 months of documented financial exploitation. Every dollar Zara had earned in Gloria's neighborhood, traced through witness statements from Ms. Patterson, from the family 2 doors down, from 3 other neighbors who had paid Zara for work and were, once approached by investigators, remarkably willing to describe the arrangement in detail. Proof of educational deprivation. School records showing Zara's abrupt withdrawal from the educational system under Gloria's guardianship, combined with the guardianship agreement itself, which contained explicit legal obligations regarding education that Gloria had violated from the first week. The guardianship document Damon Wills had produced, examined thoroughly, and found to contain irregularities that Diane Caldwell described, with professional restraint, as consistent with fraudulent procurement. Financial records showing 2 transfers from an account connected to Damon Wills to an account connected to Gloria Reeves, one before and one after the night Zara was presented to him in that living room. "What do those transfers represent?" Nathan asked, though he already suspected. "Payment," Diane Caldwell said simply. "The first was a deposit. The second was a partial fulfillment. They were negotiating the arrangement in advance. Zara sat very still across the table. She had her legal pad in front of her. She always had her legal pad, always had a pen, the habit of a person who processes the world by writing it down. But she was not writing. She was listening, with the absolute, complete focus of someone who understands, on a cellular level, the weight of what is being described. "What are the charges?" she asked. Diane Caldwell looked at her with the particular respect of an experienced attorney, recognizing someone who understands the room they are in. "The district attorney's office has been presented with our findings," she said. "They are moving forward with charges against Gloria Reeves, criminal child endangerment, fraud, and civil violations of guardianship obligations. Against Damon Wills." She paused, looked at Zara directly. "Human trafficking," she said. "Conspiracy to commit." The financial transfers, combined with witness testimony and documentary evidence, meet the threshold. It's a federal charge. Silence in the conference room. Federal. The word sat in the air with its full weight. "They didn't think anyone would look," Nathan said quietly. "They were counting on it," Diane Caldwell agreed. "People like this operate in the spaces where no one is paying attention." What they did not account for, she gathered her documents with crisp efficiency, was someone paying very close attention and having the resources to do something about it. She looked at Nathan, then at Zara. "We are ready to move," she said. "The question is whether you are." Zara picked up her pen, looked at the documents, looked at the window. Beyond it, Atlanta moved and breathed and went about its enormous, complicated, beautiful business. The same city where her parents had driven home through October rain and never arrived. The same city where a girl in a utility room had whispered into the dark that she wasn't going to give up. The same city where she had run barefoot into a January night and been hit by a car and woken up with nothing, and somehow through all of it built her way back to this table, this room, this moment. She looked at Diane Caldwell. "I'm ready," she said. Courtrooms Zara had read, had studied, had highlighted, had argued about with Dr. Whitfield across a library desk for weeks, are designed to communicate authority. The high ceilings, the wood paneling, the elevated bench. The gallery separated from the proceedings by a bar that is both physical and symbolic, a line between those with standing in the law and those who must watch from a distance. She had read about courtrooms. She had studied them. But walking into one, this specific room in the Fulton County Superior Court building on a Wednesday morning in May, with Nathan beside her and Diane Caldwell ahead of her, and the weight of everything that had brought her here pressing on every step, was something else entirely. She sat at the plaintiff's table and placed her legal pad in front of her and breathed slowly. Across the aisle, at the defense table, Gloria Reeves sat with her attorney, a competent but clearly outgunned man in his 40s, who had the expression of someone who has reviewed the opposing counsel's documentation and understood, with professional clarity, that this is not going well. Gloria herself was composed, impeccably dressed, upright, the gold jewelry still at her ears. She looked in all outward appearances like a respectable woman who had been wrongly accused. She did not look at Zara. Damon Wills was not present in this courtroom. His federal charges would be tried separately in a federal court before a federal judge, which Diane Caldwell had explained to Zara with quiet satisfaction, carried a significantly harsher sentencing framework. But his absence did not make the room feel empty. If anything, it made it feel cleaner. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge, Honorable Sandra Watkins, 61 years old, 22 years on the bench, with a reputation among Atlanta attorneys for an absolute, unwavering intolerance for procedural nonsense, took her seat and looked at the room over her glasses with the expression of a woman who has seen everything and can therefore be surprised by nothing, but who nonetheless takes each case with complete seriousness. She looked at the documents before her. She looked at the plaintiff's table. Her gaze rested on Zara for a moment, briefly, professionally, without sentiment. Then she looked at the defense table, and the proceedings began. Diane Caldwell had prepared her thoroughly. They had spent hours, evenings at the penthouse library, afternoons at the firm's conference room, mornings over coffee with documents spread between them, going through every moment, every detail, every question that opposing counsel might raise. and every answer that was not just true but clear. The kind of clear that leaves no space for reinterpretation. "Tell me the truth," Diane had said simply in their last preparation session. "Exactly as you remember it. Don't perform it. Don't manage it. Just tell the truth in your own words, in the order it happened." A jury doesn't need you to be anything other than honest. Honest is the most powerful thing you can be in that room. Zara had nodded. She understood that. She had understood it, she thought, for a long time. From books, from her father's voice, from something built into her that had survived everything else. Truth was not weakness. Truth was not vulnerability. Truth, presented clearly and without apology, was the most structurally sound thing a person could bring into a room. She took the stand, stated her name, and told the truth. She told it in the order it happened, from the night of her parents' deaths, delivered without theatrical grief, but with the quiet, devastating specificity of someone describing something real. Through every morning in the utility room, every dollar handed over, every conversation shut down, every dream deferred by a woman who wore the word blessed on her doormat and had no idea what it meant. She described the night in the living room, the man on the couch, the rings, the announcement delivered like a weather forecast. She described running, the $47, the dark streets, the headlights. She did not perform any of it, she simply said it. And the courtroom, which had heard everything, which had processed thousands of cases across decades, which was professionally resistant to sentiment, was completely, absolutely silent. Opposing counsel's cross-examination lasted 40 minutes. He challenged her timeline. He questioned her memory, pointing, with what he clearly hoped was strategic effectiveness, to the months of amnesia as evidence of unreliability. Diane Caldwell had anticipated this. "Your Honor," she said during redirect, "the defense has suggested that the plaintiff's period of amnesia undermines her testimony. I'd like to note for the record that every material fact in the plaintiff's testimony has been independently corroborated by documentary evidence, financial records, and third-party witness statements, none of which depend on the plaintiff's personal recollection." Judge Watkins looked at opposing counsel. He had nothing. On the third day of proceedings, Diane Caldwell called a witness that opposing counsel had not anticipated. Miss Erline Patterson, 74 years old. Resident of Gloria Reeves' neighborhood for 31 years. The woman whose garden Zara had tended. The woman who had pressed extra dollars into her hand and said, "Keep something for yourself, baby." She took the stand with the careful dignity of a woman who has lived long enough to know exactly what she is willing to say, and to whom and in what room. Diane Caldwell walked her through it gently. "Did you employ Zara Mitchell during the period she was living with her aunt?" "I did," Miss Patterson said, "for yard work and errands, starting November, going through January." "And how was she compensated?" "I paid her cash, whatever the work was worth." "Did you ever observe her aunt's involvement in her employment arrangements?" Miss Patterson looked at Gloria Reeves across the courtroom. Gloria looked back at her with the composed expression of a woman maintaining a performance under significant pressure. "Every dollar that child earned," Miss Patterson said, "went to that woman. I know because Zara told me, and I know because I saw it, more than once." "Can you describe what you observed?" "I saw that woman go through that girl's pockets," Miss Patterson said, with the flat, unadorned directness of an eyewitness who has no interest in diplomatic phrasing, standing right there in her own front yard. "Go through her pockets when she came home, taking what was in them." The courtroom exhaled. "I also want to say something that you didn't ask me," Miss Patterson added, looking at the judge rather than the attorneys because she had decided that was who needed to hear this. Judge Watkins looked at her. "That child," Miss Patterson said, "never once complained, never once asked me for anything extra, never once talked badly about her situation. She worked hard and she was kind, and she talked about going to law school the way some children talk about breathing, like it was just something she was always going to do." She paused, and every time she said it, that woman, her own family, acted like it was ridiculous, like the child didn't have the right to want anything for herself. She settled back. "I've said what I came to say," she announced. Judge Watkins looked at her for a long moment. "Thank you, Miss Patterson," she said. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Zara sat in the hallway outside the courtroom for most of it. Nathan beside her, Diane and Caldwell moving in and out with updates. Miss Vera having arrived at lunchtime with food that nobody fully ate, but everybody appreciated the gesture of. They didn't talk much. Sometimes that is the correct response to waiting. Sometimes the only thing to do is be present and breathe and trust the work you have done. Nathan sat beside Zara with his shoulder close to hers and said nothing, and the saying of nothing was the exact right thing. And she leaned into it slightly, and he let her, and that was enough. When the bailiff appeared to call them back in, Zara stood up, straightened her spine, breathed, walked back through the door. The jury filed in. The foreperson, a middle-aged black woman in a blue cardigan who Zara had noticed during selection, listened to every word of testimony with absolute, careful attention, stood. Judge Watkins looked at her. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." The verdict form was passed, reviewed. On the charge of criminal child endangerment, we the jury find the defendant, Gloria Reeves, guilty. Gloria's attorney put his hand on her arm. Gloria did not move. On the charge of fraud in connection with the procurement of guardianship, we the jury find the defendant, Gloria Reeves, guilty. The gallery stirred. On the civil violations of guardianship obligations, including educational deprivation and compelled labor, we the jury find for the plaintiff. Judge Watkins looked at Gloria Reeves over her glasses with the expression of a woman who has spent 22 years watching people arrive at this moment and has never stopped taking it seriously. "Miss Reeves," she said, "I have presided over a significant number of cases in this courtroom. What the evidence has demonstrated in this proceeding, the exploitation of a grieving child, the reduction of a minor to a source of labor and financial transaction, the attempted sale of a human being into a forced arrangement, represents a moral failure of the most fundamental kind." She paused. "This court will ensure that the consequences are commensurate." The gavel came down, and just like that, it was over. The federal proceedings against Damon Wills were shorter than anyone expected, not because the case was weak, but because it was so strong that his attorneys advised him, in the clearest possible terms, that trial was not in his interest. He entered a guilty plea on the federal human trafficking conspiracy charge on a Tuesday morning in August. The federal judge, a serious man with a reputation for sentencing that reflected the full weight of federal law, looked at the documentation before him, and at the man before him, and at the impact statement submitted by the victim, and sentenced Damon Wills to 19 years in federal prison. Zara was not in the courtroom that day. She was in a classroom at Spelman College, in the pre-law program she had applied to, with her transcript, her record, and a personal statement that Diane Caldwell later said was the finest legal writing she had read from a student applicant in her professional career. She found out about the sentence from Nathan's text message. She read it between classes, sat with it for a moment, then put her phone in her bag, and went back to learning the law she intended to spend her life using. Gloria Reeves was sentenced to 7 years. Her children, Deshawn and Keisha, were placed with a maternal cousin in Decatur who, from all available evidence, was everything Gloria was not. The house in East Point was subject to civil asset recovery proceedings. The gold jewelry, the comfortable furniture, the life built on a young girl's unpaid labor and silenced dreams, reduced to paperwork, to nothing. Zara did not feel satisfaction at this she had expected to. She had thought, in the honest privacy of her own mind, that justice would feel triumphant, loud, like a door slammed shut. It didn't feel like that. It felt quiet, like something that needed to be done had been done, like a weight, not gone exactly, but redistributed, carried now by the people who had always been responsible for it. She sat in the library the evening after Gloria's sentencing, back in her window seat, back in the golden light, and held the copy of Just Mercy that Nathan had given her, inscribed on the inside cover in his handwriting, to Zara, who already knew what this book was trying to say. And she read for a long time. Then she set it down and looked out at the city, her city, the city where everything had been taken from her, the city where everything had been returned. People ask, sometimes, what justice feels like. They expect the answer to be big. They expect fireworks. They expect the kind of emotional resolution that movies put music under and audiences respond to with tears and applause. But the truth, the honest, unglamorous, completely real truth, is that justice doesn't feel like a finale. It feels like a foundation, a cleared space, a ground solid enough to build something real on. And Zara Mitchell, who had lost everything on a rainy October night on Cascade Avenue, who had been worked and silenced and nearly sold, who had run barefoot into the dark with $47 and a cracked phone and a name she would temporarily lose, who had woken up in a hospital with nothing and rebuilt herself piece by piece in a library overlooking Atlanta, was not finished. She was not at the end of anything. She was at the beginning, and the beginning was extraordinary. The Office of Mitchell Legal Aid, Community Justice Division, occupied the third floor of a building on Auburn Avenue in Sweet Auburn, the historic heart of Black Atlanta, the neighborhood that had given the world Martin Luther King Jr., that had housed the offices of the Atlanta Daily World, that had stood for a century as evidence that a community could build something magnificent from within itself, regardless of what surrounded it. Zara had chosen the location deliberately, not for the history, though the history mattered deeply, and she thought about it every time she walked through the door, but because the people she intended to serve lived here, worked here, were processed through a legal system here that had, for generations, treated their presence as a problem to be managed rather than a humanity to be respected. She wanted to be where they were. She wanted them to be able to walk to her door. The office was not large. 3 attorneys, including herself, a paralegal named Brianna, who had grown up in Mechanicsville and had, upon being hired, informed Zara that she intended to go to law school within 3 years and expected the firm to support that goal. Zara had shaken her hand and said absolutely, and meant it so completely that Brianna had looked slightly surprised. A waiting area with good chairs, not plastic, not the defeated furniture of a place that has given up on the people it serves, but real chairs, comfortable ones chosen with the specific intention of communicating. You matter here. Your time matters. Your dignity matters. A small library, law books, constitutional texts, community resource guides that Zara had built shelf by shelf over the past 2 years. In the corner of it, framed and hung at eye level, was a quote from Brian Stevenson. "Each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done." She had put it there for clients. But some mornings, when she arrived early and the office was still quiet, and the Auburn Avenue light came through the windows at its particular hopeful angle, she read it for herself. She had graduated from Spelman College in 3 years. Not because she rushed, but because she had arrived knowing exactly what she was there for and had moved through it with the focused, unhurried intensity of someone who has already waited long enough and is now simply doing the work. She had been admitted to Emory University School of Law on a full merit scholarship, the admissions committee's letter describing her application as among the most compelling we have reviewed in recent years. Dr. Whitfield, her first tutor, the man who had come to Nathan's penthouse 3 times a week to teach constitutional law to a girl with no memory who turned out to have more legal instinct than most of his graduate students, had written her recommendation letter personally. It was 4 pages long. He had never written a 4-page recommendation letter in 40 years of teaching. She had cried when she read it, and then immediately felt embarrassed about crying, and then decided she was allowed to cry about something like that, and had cried a little more. Law school was the hardest thing she had ever done. It was also, without question, without competition, the most alive she had ever felt. She argued. She researched. She wrote briefs at 2 in the morning with cold coffee and the absolute conviction of someone who understood, from the inside, what the law could do when it failed the people it was supposed to protect, and what it could do when it didn't. She graduated in the top 3% of her class. She passed the Georgia bar on her first attempt, and then she had done the thing that confused some of her classmates, that made some of her professors raise their eyebrows, that made several recruiting firms extend offers she declined politely, but without hesitation. She opened a legal aid practice, not because she couldn't have gone elsewhere, because there was nowhere else she wanted to be. "I know what it feels like," she had said simply, To Nathan, the night she told him her plan. To need someone in your corner and have no one. To be in front of a system that has all the power and have nothing to push back with. I know what that feels like in my body. I'm not going to know it and do nothing about it. Nathan had looked at her for a long moment. Then he had said, "What do you need? Not are you sure? Not have you considered? Not let me tell you about the financial realities. Just, what do you need?" She had needed office space, startup funding, and someone who believed in the work enough to help her get it off the ground before it could stand on its own. He had provided all three, without conditions, without requiring his name on the door, without anything except the quiet satisfaction of a man who understands what it means to use what you have in the service of something that matters. In 2 years of operation, Mitchell Legal Aid had handled 137 cases. Wrongful evictions, wage theft, discriminatory employment practices, criminal defense for clients who had been appointed counsel so overworked and under-resourced that justice had been, in practical terms, unavailable to them. 3 exoneration cases, individuals who had been convicted of crimes the evidence, when properly examined, showed they had not committed. 2 of those cases were still in progress. One had concluded 6 months ago with a man named Curtis Webb, 53 years old, 17 years wrongfully incarcerated, walking out of a Georgia correctional facility into the kind of sunlight that means something specific when you have been deprived of it for 17 years. Zara had been there. She had watched him walk out. She had not cried. She had cried in her car before going in. The private necessary crying of someone who carries the weight of what she's fighting against in her body and occasionally needs to put it down for a moment. But when Curtis Webb walked out, and his daughter, 31 years old, who had been 14 when he went in, ran to him, and they held each other on the concrete outside that facility, Zara had thought of Raymond Mitchell, of his hand on a book cover, of his voice across a kitchen table, of everything he had believed she would become. "They're not ready for you, Zara." She had pressed her lips together and thought, watch. They had married on a Saturday in October, not the anniversary of the accident. Deliberately not that, deliberately a different October day, a new one. One that belonged entirely to them and to nothing that had come before. The ceremony was small. Auburn Avenue's Big Bethel AME Church, the oldest African-American congregation in Atlanta. A building that had stood as witness to more of the city's history than any other structure Zara could think of. Because Zara had decided that if she was going to get married, she was going to do it somewhere that understood the weight of what had been survived to get to the celebration. 40 people. Miss Vera in the front row, wearing a hat that she had been planning since approximately the day she watched Nathan stand in the library doorway, looking at a girl in a window seat with a face she had never seen on him before. Gerald, who had catered the reception personally and considered this his greatest professional achievement to date, including the time he had cooked for a sitting governor. Dr. Whitfield, who had arrived with his wife and shaken Zara's hand at the reception and said, with characteristic dry understatement, "You turned out reasonably well." Marcus Webb, Nathan's head of security, who had run the partial plate on a dark SUV on a February night and set the machinery of justice in motion, who had brought his wife and both his children and danced with a commitment that surprised everyone, including himself. Miss Erline Patterson, who had taken the stand in a courtroom and said what needed saying and was now seated in a church pew in her finest dress looking at Zara the way people look at something they had a small part in growing and feel quietly, completely proud of. And Dr. Patricia Okafor, the Legal Aid Foundation director they had introduced Zara to in those early months, who had become a mentor, a colleague, and something close to the older sister Zara had never had. Nathan had stood at the front of the church and watched Zara walk toward him, and had felt, in that moment, the particular emotion that has no single word in English, but that every human being recognizes when it arrives, the feeling of a life making sense, of pieces that were broken finding, against all probability, exactly the right configuration. He had thought of his mother, of Carolyn Cole in her yellow dress at a cookout mid-law caught in an unguarded moment, of her 3 rules: you stop, you stay, you help. He had done all 3, and what had come from it was standing in front of him in a dress the color of champagne with her natural hair pinned up, and her eyes absolutely clear, and a smile that started, like her mother's had, somewhere deep in the chest, and was everything. It was Brianna who knocked on the office door at 6:15. "Zara, there's someone here." Zara looked up from the file she had been reviewing. A wrongful termination case, a 44-year-old woman named Darlene, who had been fired from her job of 11 years after taking protected medical leave, a case that was, in Zara's considered legal opinion, extremely winnable, and set her pen down. "Send them in." The door opened. Nathan walked in. He was in his work clothes. The end of a long day visible in the loosened collar, the jacket over one arm. But his expression was the expression he wore when he had done something and was waiting to see how it landed. "You were supposed to be here at 6, Zara said. "I was. It's 6:15. There was traffic on Peachtree. There is always traffic on Peachtree. You know this. You have known this for years." "I stopped to get something," he said. He set a brown paper bag on her desk. She looked at it. "Gerald's peach cobbler," he said, still warm. "He said to tell you that you've been working too many hours and that nutrition is foundational to effective legal practice." Zara looked at the bag, then at Nathan. "He's not wrong," she said. "He's never wrong," Nathan agreed. "It's one of his most irritating qualities." She stood up, came around the desk, took the bag, looked into it. Then she looked up at him. This man who had stopped on a January night on Campbellton Road, who had sat in a plastic chair in a hospital waiting room until 2 in the morning, who had opened a library and a guest suite and a future and said no conditions, no obligations, just a safe place, and had meant every word of it. This man who had stood beside her in a hallway when the past came knocking and said no one owns her without raising his voice. This man who had come to her law school graduation and sat in the audience and, she had been told by Dr. Whitfield, who had been sitting beside him, cried when her name was called, which Nathan had subsequently and strenuously denied and continued to deny to this day. She looked at him. "You're a good man, Nathan Cole," she said. He held her gaze. "I had a good teacher," he said. She knew he meant his mother. She also understood, from the way he was looking at her, that he did not mean only his mother. She put the cobbler on the desk and stood close to him and looked out the window at Auburn Avenue below, the street moving through its early evening rhythm. People coming home from work, children outside a corner store, the permanent, beautiful motion of a neighborhood that has survived everything thrown at it and remains, fundamentally, itself. "I've been thinking," she said. "About?" "Curtis Webb," she said. "About what happens to people after exoneration, the practical reality. Housing, employment, mental health support, legal identity restoration. The system does almost nothing to help people reintegrate after wrongful incarceration." Nathan looked at her sideways. "You're about to tell me about a new project," he said. "I'm about to tell you about a new project," she confirmed. "How big?" "Bigger than the office." "How much bigger?" She turned to look at him fully. "I want to build something," she said. "A center. Reintegration services, legal support, mental health, job training, a whole ecosystem for people coming out of wrongful convictions, not just in Atlanta, nationally." Nathan was quiet for a moment. She watched him process it, the way she had come to know his thinking face over 4 years of mornings and evenings and everything between. The slight internal focus, the measuring of scale against possibility. Then, "What do you need?" he said. The same words, the same complete, uncomplicated, unconditional question. "What do you need?" She almost smiled. "I need a partner," she said. "Someone who believes in the work." "You have one," he said. "I need funding. You have that too. I need someone who isn't going to tell me it's too big or too complicated or too ambitious." Nathan looked at her. "Zara," he said, "in the entire time I have known you, including the period when you didn't know your own name, I have never once thought that anything you wanted to build was too big." She looked at him for a long moment. The office was quiet around them. Auburn Avenue moved outside the window. The cobbler sat on the desk, getting slightly less warm than it had been. "I love you," she said. "I love you," he said. Simple. Real. The way love sounds when it has been tested and held and chosen every single day for long enough to know its own weight. She turned back to the window. He came to stand beside her. They looked out at the city together. The city that had taken everything from her and given everything back. The city that was enormous and complicated, and full of people who needed someone in their corner. The city that had been, in the most devastating and ultimately most transformative way, the landscape of her entire becoming. My father used to say, Zara said quietly, that knowledge was the most dangerous weapon a black child in America could carry. Nathan listened. I think he was right, she said. But I think it's more than knowledge. What else? She thought about it. About Raymond and Diane. About the utility room and the $47. About a hospital ceiling and a nameless beginning and a library with morning light and a balcony overlooking a glowing city and a courtroom where a gavel came down and the sound of it echoed. Survival? She said. Survival is a weapon too. Knowing you made it through the thing that was supposed to stop you, knowing it in your body, in your history, in the actual lived record of your life, that's something nobody can take. She paused. They tried, she said. They took my parents. They took my home. They took my name for a while. They took months of my life. She straightened. But they didn't take me, she said. I'm still here. I'm more here than I have ever been. Nathan was very still beside her. Yes, he said. You are. Later that evening, after the cobbler had been eaten and the files had been put away, and the office locked and Auburn Avenue given over to its nighttime self, Zara sat in the passenger seat of Nathan's car as they drove home through the Atlanta dark. She had her legal pad on her lap. She was already writing. The new project. The center. The ecosystem she intended to build for people the system had failed and then abandoned. Because she understood, from the inside, what abandonment felt like and had decided a long time ago that understanding was not permission to do nothing. Nathan drove and said nothing and let her write, because that was what he did. He made space. He stopped and stayed and made space. And in that space, something extraordinary had grown. Zara Mitchell wrote until they reached Buckhead. Then she put the cap on her pen and looked out the window at the city passing by, all light and motion, and the permanent, beautiful, exhausting, extraordinary business of being alive, and felt something she had first felt in a utility room at 5 in the morning before the sun came up and the work began. Something she had felt on a hospital bed with no name. Something she had felt in a library window seat with just mercy in her hands. Something she had felt standing in a courtroom watching a gavel come down. Something she would feel every morning for the rest of her life when she walked through the door of Mitchell Legal Aid on Auburn Avenue and looked at the chairs she had chosen carefully and the library she had built shelf by shelf and the faces of people who had come to her door because they needed someone in their corner. Certainty. Complete, unshakable, hard-won certainty. Not that the world was fair. Not that the fight was easy. Not that justice came without cost, or that love came without risk, or that survival came without scars. But that she was here. That she had made it. That everything they had taken, and everything she had lost, and everything that had been done to her in the dark, had not been enough to stop her, would never have been enough to stop her. Because Zara Mitchell was not the girl who had been broken. She was the woman who had been forged. There is a difference. The difference is everything. Her father once told her she would change the world. He said it at a kitchen table, in a quiet Atlanta neighborhood, on an ordinary evening before everything ordinary was taken away. He was right. Not in the way he imagined, not yet, not fully, not in the wide world historical sense that a father's pride sometimes speaks in, but in the way that actually matters. In the case of the man who walked out of a correctional facility after 17 wrongful years and stood in the sunlight blinking. In the case of the woman who kept her job after taking the medical leave she was legally entitled to. In the case of the child who will grow up with a parent who came home because someone fought for them. In the case of everyone who will walk through the door of the center she is building, the one that doesn't exist yet, but is already taking shape in the margins of a legal pad, in the passenger seat of a car, moving through the Atlanta night. In the case of every person who will sit across a desk from Zara Mitchell and hear, perhaps for the first time, from someone with the power to help them. I believe you. You matter here. I'm in your corner. Let's fight. Raymond Mitchell told his daughter she would change the world, and Zara Mitchell, who lost everything, who was broken and used and nearly erased, who ran barefoot into the dark and came back with her whole self, decided he was right, and got to work. She didn't just survive, she rose, and her story was only the beginning. Zara Mitchell, from nothing to everything, from invisible to unstoppable, from a girl who whispered in the dark, to a woman who changed what the dark looked like. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, share it. Someone out there needs to hear it. Like, subscribe, and come back for the next story, because we are just getting started.